So today we're going to be talking about tier lists, and we're going to be going over my totally non-biased, official, definitive tier list for Eternal Return Black Survival. So first things first, I do want to bring up what these different tiers sort of represent. Everything here in the middle from A+ to C is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically they're not good enough to be in S tier, or they're not good enough, or they're not bad enough to be in D tier. But the thing about S tier that I want to quickly bring up is that if for something to fit into S tier, it truly has to go above and beyond all other characters, or all other characters that aren't in S tier. And the thing also about an S tier character is that it probably has to perform well across every queue. It can't just be a solo queue all-star. It can't just be a squad powerhouse. It has to be something that works everywhere. And also, one more thing is that if a character is just good at dumpstering, say, ranged characters, or has a really good melee matchup, that may not necessarily mean it's good for S tier, because someone in S tier has to be well-rounded enough to just stand out against the others. And similarly, in D tier, down here at the bottom, the thing about a D tier character, it's not necessarily that it's so bad that it can't compete against these other characters. A D tier character can still win games, even consistently. But the thing about a D tier character is that it probably has to work so much harder than everybody else on the list to achieve similar or slightly worse results. Also, a D tier character may just have enough absolutely terrible matchups, or might just be so bad in specific queues that it just warrants being in D tier. Now with that said, I'm going to jump straight into it. So for this tier list, we're going to be going sort of freeform in terms of when we're going to place what and where. I'm actually just going to start by placing some sort of pillars, some pylons on this tier list that you can sort of use to compare other characters to, so that you have a good reference point. And to me, one of the first things I have to put down always on this tier list is Dual Swords Jackie in A+ tier. So the thing about Dual Swords Jackie is that it is extremely good. It's in fact so good that I can't stop seeing people posting about how actually good it is. People are obsessed with Dual Sword Jackie's power, and the truth is that it is actually powerful. It's not just a noob stomper. It's actually quite good, but it's not quite S tier, because Dual Swords Jackie by herself cannot just single-handedly obliterate an enemy team. Dual Swords Jackie by herself does not have such an outstanding win rate that it stands above everything else. It has really good matchups in any sustained fight, it's really good against melees, and it's just kind of really flexible. It builds fast, it can be played full spell amp, it can be played Dioscuri with lots of lifesteal. It's just an all-around really strong character / weapon combination, but I don't think it quite fits into S tier, although I do think it stands above the A tiers, and it pretty much lands itself solidly in A+ tier. Now, after Dual Swords Jackie, the question is, how do you rank the other Jackie weapons? And the thing is that I would personally rank Two-Handed Sword Jackie in A tier, just slightly below Dual Swords Jackie. There's an argument for it being the same as A+ tier, but after the nerf to the Two-Handed Sword Mastery, it's probably just a little bit worse than it. It's still quite good though. And moving right along, straight down the line, we have Axe Jackie and Dagger Jackie both landing in B tier. The thing about Axe Jackie and Dagger Jackie is they personally, in my opinion, do not do anything better than Dual Swords or Two-Handed to stand above them. The Jackie-Dagger interaction is not so amazing that it's really worth putting above the others, especially with Mount Slicer having been nerfed so much, and that really being the only dagger that was sort of standing out on Jackie. And Axe, while Axe also has some good builds, it's kind of more just an early game cheese. It doesn't really scale that well in the late game. I just have to put Axe in B. It's consistently decent, but not amazing. And that's sort of it for Jackie. Jackie's just overall good. She just sort of lands in the upper end of the tier list. She's not broken, but she's consistently very good. So moving right along, I'm gonna go and talk about some Hyunwoo. So in my opinion, Hyunwoo with the glove. I'm gonna have to go with Hyunwoo glove in A+ tier. Hyunwoo with glove is really strong. It's consistently very good. Glove skill is amazing, and the stats on gloves are really good compared to Tonfa. And with that being said, I'm gonna have to solidly place Tonfa in B tier, where it is simply just decent, but not amazing. Glove right now, gloves in general just have great stats for a melee, and the glove skill gives you a ton of free true damage. Glove in general is just very good. He can be played sort of extremely tanky with Bloodwing Knuckle and a bunch of other stuff like that. He can be played with 1-inch punch with Rocker's Jacket, just sort of run him down and beat the shit out of you style, which is pretty strong right now. And he can also be played full amp, or at least just sort of half amp, which is really good on him too. Hyun with glove is just consistently very good. He's a CC bot who brings a lot of free percent damage, and he's just tanky and sustainable. Glove Hyun is quite good. Now as for Tonfa Hyun, Tonfas in general just don't have the best stats right now. Even though Plasma Tonfa can be made in one zone, it's just not that amazing, and the Tonfa skill, while being powerful historically, is not that amazing at the moment. So I would put Tonfa in B. It's still attached to Hyunwoo, so it's quite good, but it's not as amazing as, say, glove skill. So to follow up Hyun, I'm gonna actually reach deeper into the roster of characters and just pull out another B tier, putting someone just sort of right in the middle, and that character is gonna be Hart. I genuinely think Hart right now is roughly a B tier character. There's some spell amp builds that are pretty decent on her, and she can do pretty well in squad mode, and she can do okay sometimes in solo with extra normal, but I don't think she's amazing right now. I think she's too squishy for the extra normal builds. She lost a lot of her regen when they nerfed regen across the board recently, and they've been nerfing Teen Spirit in general a lot too. I also think that her spell amp builds are no longer the powerhouses that they used to be, and I think she's just a solid B tier at the moment. Now, after Hart, this next character, both of their weapons put themselves right into B tier, and that would be Zahir. So Zahir historically has been actually quite strong, and I would say even before this patch, he was I probably would have put Shuriken in A or maybe even A+ tier prior to this patch. But after the Shuriken nerfs and after the throw buffs, throw moved from C tier up to B tier, and Shuriken moved down from A tier to B tier. So now they're both roughly B tier. So a funny thing just happened. I actually recorded this video earlier tonight, and a patch notes just came out that said that Shoichi's been heavily changed. Massive nerfs across the board to pretty much all of his skills, and it's unclear if he's even going to be played the same way anymore. He might just become a crit character now. But in any case, whatever rating I'd put him at before, that rating is no longer applicable to this tier list. We have no idea how good he is now, and for now we're just going to leave him in sort of a state of limbo and just say we don't know, because we just don't have the data yet. Moving right along, the next character I want to talk about is actually going to be Aya. Now, Aya has 3 weapons, and they're all vastly different in terms of their power and in terms of their flexibility. So personally, I play a lot of Pistol Aya, so I'm pretty biased in terms of its strength. In my opinion, I genuinely think that Pistol Aya is A tier at the moment. I also think that AR Aya is B tier, and unfortunately, I'm going to be placing Sniper Aya in D tier, being our first addition to the D tier. And my reasoning for this is that Pistol Aya in general is the most flexible and consistent version of Aya. Aya with pistol has a lot of mobility, she has a lot of skill spam ability, and she's generally just a pretty decent fighter. Unfortunately though, in solo, being a ranged character is not exactly an advantage right now, and while solo Ayas can do quite well with their self-peel and mobility, they are eventually going to have to deal with some of the more difficult matchups for Aya, and that means that she really can't be S or A+ tier, but she's very firmly in A tier. Good, consistent character, not broken, not weak, but good. As for AR Aya, I think AR Aya is fairly strong in the right hands, and is very strong if you can finish your build, but AR Aya is not very mobile and can't kite very well. The thing about AR is that it has sort of a drawn out auto attack animation, and she's forced to sit there autoing and not able to orb block that much or sort of move around while she's attacking. As a result, as being sort of an immobile version of Aya and not having the most amazing damage in the world, AR Aya is very solidly a B tier character. And then as for Sniper Aya, the thing about Sniper Aya is not actually that bad. However, Sniper Aya is also not that great. It's sort of an issue where she has some decent builds if she high rolls, but if she doesn't, she's just sort of mediocre, and her damage definitely falls off in the late game. The thing about Sniper Aya is that the only real decent version of Sniper Aya at the moment is Amp Aya, and the only real decent way of getting a good Amp Aya build is when combined with Pistol Aya. It's actually a form of Aya called Sniper Pistol, where you sort of make up for your horrible mobility or lack thereof on Sniper Aya by running a sidearm pistol that you can swap to negate your movement speed penalty, but also get access to moving reload so that you can use that for repositioning. The fact that for Sniper Aya to be at all a decent character, she needs to have a second weapon that is not Sniper Aya means that it really just is nothing but D tier at the moment. Yes, it can do decent damage in the right circumstance, but she needs an entire team to back her up, and to me that's just too inflexible and has too many flaws, so she is firmly a D tier character. Now, moving right along, and very similar to Pistol Aya, is going to be Pistol Isol, who I will also be placing firmly in A tier for roughly the same reasons that Pistol Aya is in A tier. Pistol Isol is strong, mobile, has a lot of utility, brings a lot to the team, and also can do relatively okay in solo, but he's not amazing. The thing about Isol right now is that since we had the recent nerf to combat trap placing, Isol's actually gone up quite a bit in terms of team evaluations and solo evaluations, because he's able to be pretty much the only character that can consistently place traps mid-combat, and that alone is very valuable. In addition to that, Isol just brings a lot of utility in general, and he's pretty obnoxious to deal with. So I would say he's definitely firmly in an A tier. He's not too strong to be an A+ tier, his damage really isn't high enough, and he certainly isn't the overwhelming force enough to be an S tier. Now, as far as AR Isol goes, I'm going to have to put him in C tier. Unlike AR Aya, who actually has a passive that benefits AR quite a lot, there's really nothing about Isol's kit that really warrants him being AR. The thing though is that he is still Isol, so he is still fairly decent, and AR isn't that bad of a weapon class at the moment, so he's pretty much just a C tier character with an AR. Next up is going to be similar to Zahir, another character where both of their weapons are firmly in the same tier, and that is going to be Magnus, with both the bat and the hammer being placed into B tier. Now, if you couldn't tell by now, B tier is filling out quite a bit. B tier has a lot of these characters that are consistently good, not amazing, not too weak, but consistently there, and you know that they're a decent factor on their team or in solo. Bat and hammer are both fairly decent. They're not amazing, but they're not too bad. If we ever see some more buffs towards hammer or bat, we'll see it rise quite a bit, but at the moment it's just firmly B tier. Now, the character in question that we're going to be talking about next is Fiora. Now, in my opinion, Spear Fiora is one of the strongest weapon / character combinations in the game at the moment. Spear Fiora is very, very powerful, with her ability to just burst anybody who comes near her for a ton of damage with her E and W combo. Now, the thing is that does Spear Fiora warrant that S tier slot as well? And unfortunately, I have to say it does not. The thing about Spear Fiora is that it is solidly A+ tier. It's really strong at the moment, like one of the highest damage characters in the game, especially burst-wise, she is exceptional. But the thing is that aside from just chunking one character really fast, she doesn't do anything that's too backbreaking for the rest of the cast. She can destroy a single character very quickly, but say in a team setting or even in solo, if she gets third partied, she won't do too much after she's done her initial burst. And she doesn't really have quite the tools that the S tiers have. So as a result, I would say Fiora with a spear is firmly an A+ tier. As for the rest of Fiora and her weapons, I think Rapier and Two-Handed Sword are both roughly B tier at the moment. I think Rapier has access to Rapier skill, so it's quite decent, and the stats on Rapiers aren't terrible, but they're pretty lacking after all of the nerfs recently. As for Two-Handed Sword has pretty decent stats, but saw a mastery nerf in the last patch, so I think Two-Handed Sword's not that amazing at the moment, but it's still pretty good. The stats on the swords are pretty decent, so at the end of the day, Rapier, Two-Handed Sword, both going into B tier. The next character we're going to talk about is our first addition to S tier. And I think this one's pretty obvious. If you've been playing the game at all, most people pretty much acknowledge that this character is undoubtedly very, very dominating and very good. And that is, of course, Glove Dailin. The thing about Glove Dailin is that Glove Dailin has it all. She's dominating in teams, she's dominating in solo. She has some of the highest mobility in the game. She has tools throughout any portion of the game. She can kill you early, she can kill you late game. She has one of the best escapes in the game. She has an execute, she has auto attack dodging, spell damage mitigation, 2-second silence in an AoE. Like, she's got just everything. There's nothing in this character's kit that's weak, and when you slap Glove on top of it, she gets access to a very strong true damage burst that can crit, and she is often built full crit, and that can do a ton of damage. Glove Dailin is exceptionally strong at the moment and is firmly in S tier. She has everything. Now, as for Nunchuck Dailin, I'd have to put Nunchuck Dailin in A or B tier. It's actually hard to decide which one. I think I'm going to put her in A tier simply because at the end of the day, even though the nunchucks aren't too overstated at the moment, they are still attached to Dailin, who is quite a good character. So I think it's firmly in A tier. Now, as for the rest of these characters, I'm going to sort of speed it up and sort of rapid fire these. Now, this next character has a very dominating kit and is often slept on in the NA scene, but is very popular in Korea. This character is a powerhouse when left unchecked, and has some of the best kiting potential in the game. However, I don't think they're S tier, and I'm not even going to be placing them in A+ tier. And that is, of course, Sissela with Shuriken, going into A tier. Sissela is still quite a good character all around, and she has all the tools that she's had previously. But the thing is that her raw power isn't quite there to warrant being in A+ tier. She can't just delete somebody. And some comps don't want characters that can't just delete somebody, although she does bring a lot of utility. In solo, she's not amazing, but she is still quite good. She has the chance to win against most matchups, but some characters just are unfair matchups for Sissela in solo, so I can't really warrant putting her in A+ tier, but she is quite good. Next up would be another addition to S tier. Now, this character has a lot of tools. They have CC that is really hard to handle. They have a lot of innate sustain. They have range. They have the stats of a melee. They have sort of everything, and an exceptional weapon skill that complements their kit very well. And of course, I'm talking about Chiara, who I'll be putting in S tier. Rapier Chiara is one of the strongest characters in the game. In all Qs, she's completely dominant and has very few just truly poor matchups. In addition, the fact that her ult has iframes on the second activation of her execute makes it so all one-on-one fights are pretty much in her favor, because she gets the final word on who takes the last amount of damage. Additionally, since the range on her reactivation of her ultimate is so huge, she's a really strong tool in teams at picking off someone who got very low, but maybe on the other side of the fight, she can just make sure that that person dies. Chiara is exceptional. She's very, very powerful, and definitely warrants the S tier slot. As for one of the weaker characters in the cast, after several nerfs over time, this character is pretty firmly in C tier, and of course I'm talking about Hyejin with the bow. I think Hyejin is still quite good, but the thing about Hyejin is that she has to work so much harder than most other characters on this list to perform relatively the same and achieve the same results. Bow Hyejin is still fairly decent in the right hands, but I can't say she's really on the same tier or better than any of the B tier characters. Now, moving on from just Bow Hyejin, we have Shuriken Hyejin, which honestly and very obviously is a D tier character. I don't need to speak too much on Shuriken Hyejin. She's pretty much non-existent in the entire game and is considered one of the weakest characters, if not the weakest combination in the entire game. Now, after Hyejin, we actually have another character who uses bow, which is of course Nadine. And the question is, where does Nadine go? Nadine's been seeing nerfs constantly, patch after patch after patch, but the question is that enough to put her in C or D tier? And now, for Bo, yeah, it's actually true. Yeah, Bo Nadine is actually D tier. It's not very good. It's been statistically performing poorly, and anecdotally, it's just not that great. The thing about Bo Nadine is that there's nothing that Bo Nadine does that crossbow Nadine doesn't do better at the moment. The stats on the bows aren't great, the auto attack bows specifically. The fact that Arrow Rain's been nerfed so many times it lost its auto attack slow, or its attack speed slow, it's just not that great at the moment. Bo Nadine doesn't perform well in solo because the bow skill is just much worse than crossbow skill as a self-peel, self-sustaining tool, so it's just not that good. And the weapon stats are just not enough to warrant it. You get a little bit of extra range on her auto attacks, but range isn't that valuable in solo. And as for teams, air range just isn't that important anymore. It used to be very good, but it's just kind of not because it's been nerfed so much. And the stats on the bows just aren't worth having a Nadine on your team. But when it comes to crossbow, I would still put crossbow in B tier. Because the thing about crossbow is that it still has a very dominating early game, and it can scale well into the late game if you get pretty much uninterrupted farming. That being said, I still don't think crossbow Nadine is quite the powerhouse that it was previously in all queues. I think it's just average at the moment. Our next character in line is unfortunately going to be put straight into C tier, and that is Adriana. I don't feel like I have to say much about Adriana. She's been buffed a couple times since her release, but she released very poor and very weak. So unfortunately, Adriana is still roughly C tier. She doesn't do enough damage to really put herself out as a threat at any point in the game. Now, that just leaves us two final characters. Now, one of these characters is actually going to be put into S tier, and I don't think it's quite a secret which one's going into S tier. And that is, of course, not going to be Yuki. See, Yuki is going to be put into A+ tier because he's actually quite great. He has exceptional mobility, and he has exceptional utility. He has AoE true damage, 25% of your max HP true damage, in addition to other damage. That's an insane tool right there. And in addition to that, he's got disarms, he's got crazy mobility that pretty much no range can put up with. Like, if a Yuki is hot on your trail and he wants you dead as a ranged character in solo, he's pretty much gonna make sure that you die, and you can't get away from him. Yuki is very powerful. Now, as for the final character in our tier list, it's no secret that Xiukai is powerful. It's no secret that Xiukai is probably broken. He has the best button in the game, and he has an exceptional passive that makes sure that he heals more than anyone else, and everyone on his team is going to be healing more than everyone else. He's got several thousand HP because he's stacking up a bunch of food stacks. He has slows, he has range, he has AoEs, and of course, last but not least, he has his absolutely overpowered ultimate that can just shred entire teams, or in solo, just shred an entire player. Xiukai is exceptionally strong in all queues, in all phases of the game. Xiukai is S tier. And that will do it. That's actually every single character rated from S tier to D tier. You see a sort of bell curve type shape on this tier list. Honestly, a lot of characters sort of just fit into this average, fairly balanced state. It's a lot closer than you'd think. A D tier character can kill an S tier character pretty much any day of the week, but the thing is that these S tiers are just consistently better than everybody else in every queue and in every situation. Doesn't mean that an S tier character is broken or overpowered, it just means that they're consistently very good in all situations. And yeah, that sort of just does it for my tier list. What were your thoughts on my placements? Were there any maybe characters that you thought should be higher or lower? Specific weapons that should be rated higher, maybe considered not quite as strong? I'm curious what your thoughts are. Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much, guys.